How's it going, everyone? So, before we dive into the episode, I really want to say thank you to everyone that is listening in, that's tuning in, that's enjoying this content and getting value from it. I really love that. That's why I do it. But there's a huge amount of you that are listening that are not subscribed, not following the podcast. And I really want to encourage you to please follow and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you are listening or viewing this on. It really helps out the podcast. It helps out the algorithm. It helps more people hear this content that you already find helpful and that they hopefully will as well. So if you go ahead and subscribe or follow the podcast on any platform that you're listening on, and please share it with your friends, that'll be great. All right. Thanks, everyone. Let's get into the episode. How's it going, Chris? It's great to finally get you on the podcast. I think we've been planning this thing for a while, but I'm very excited for our conversation.
Yeah, me too. It's been a few months. We've been going back and forth, and finally getting on here has been really good.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Chris, I start everyone off with telling their background, right? What made you want to get into IT? What made you want to get into cybersecurity? And the reason why I start everyone off there is because there's a portion of my audience that might be trying to get into IT or security for the very first time, right? And hearing everyone's background, maybe it lines up with someone else's and they can say, oh, you know what? If he did it, maybe I can do it too. Okay. So where did you get your start? What was that like?
I was really into computers as a kid. I mean, I was around back when the old Texas Instrument machines were out there trying to code stuff in to make a little guy dance on the screen when I was a young kid. And then college, kind of got into exercise. I was an exercise sport science major and then also a computer information systems major. So I was a double major. Got on with, used to be Guard Brothers, became Sports Authority in their help desk starting off the beginning. Did some AS400 work for them, moved into a network engineer, and then started with some managed services providers, kind of learning all the different types of technology out there. After working about 6 years of that, I started my own company. And the security piece kind of just came into because our clients really needed it. And we started in 2010, and security was important, but not to the level it is now. And as time went on, it was a necessity to learn and get into it and really understand it, to keep up with the needs and actually a lot of the threats that were out there. So,
yeah, it's interesting, because the one thing that that I pick out, right, when you were just describing your background, is that curiosity, right? It's kind of that. It's like that hunger that can never be, fully fed, right? It's an interesting part of our dynamic in cybersecurity, where like the successful people that stay in cybersecurity for long term, they're very curious. They really want to understand how something works, what makes it tick, right? And that I feel like that's a critical piece for anyone to get into cybersecurity. Would you agree with that, or maybe there's other pieces?
No, I think you definitely have to be curious. You've got to be curious. You got to be up for a challenge, and you've got to really want to do a lot of research and a lot of looking into things, investigation, all the pieces that go with that. And I think it lends coming from straight IT and security kind of lead into each other, because back in the day, having to look up what would cause an issue, didn't understand what was going on. I think that's led into the security piece where you start to understand the different pieces of like tradecraft and different things that malicious actors are doing and the things that they're using out there to make things work in their favor against the average user or the average company.
Yeah, when you were in IT and kind of going down that security path, right, kind of leaning towards it, was there ever an event or breach or something of that nature that really kind of, I guess, sparked your interest or kind of opened up your mind to it? I'll give you an example from my own, right? So when I was trying to get into security and I was on help desk, I started reading about the complexity of Stuxnet and how Stuxnet was able to, wait for the perfect time, and then it would strike and make it look like nothing ever happened, and then, basically get rid of itself throughout the network.
Hmm.
right? That complexity, that kind of logic behind it is really what sparked my interest in security. Like, oh wait, if that's possible, then like it's basically endless possibilities, right? So how do you stay on top of that? And the curiosity part kind of played into that. Was there anything that kind of sparked your interest or desire in that way?
I think some of the big things, it was the early days of uh, the different type of mail viruses are going out where they were setting up mass mailers and things like that. And I believe we had like one of those happen with Sports Authority where we had to be deeply involved figuring out exactly what happened, how we were getting it, because they were getting blacklisted all over the place. And that kind of started me going a little bit down the security path because it was more that I was tasked with figuring out what was going on and how to get that situated. And then later on, as we went further down, got more into the malwares and the ransomwares that came along afterwards. And we've had some really interesting, crazy situations we've had with clients that have really been, while the time very stressful, but very illuminating and very, I mean, to be absolutely honest, it's interesting and kind of fun to go through those things. It's super stressful, but once you get out of it and everything like that, I mean, it's really, really kind of fun doing the investigation piece and shutting down the channels that they're using to get in and those kind of things. So I think it was really just the process of dealing with the first uh, small issue that came out really sparked me in wanting to get into the bigger ones.
Hmm. Yeah, that is it's really interesting. You know, I try to always when people are asking me if they should get into cybersecurity or what it's like, you know, I almost kind of try to talk them out of it, right? Because if I can talk you out of it in just a conversation, then when you get into an incident or, you know, a major investigation like that, right, you're going to be convinced pretty quickly, like, hey, this isn't for me. This is not what I wanted, or anything like that. So I try to save people the time in the front end, right? What kind of advice do you give to people that are trying to get started in security, in IT? You know, if this is the path that they want to go down.
You got to be willing to work some long nights and weekends for sure. I mean, that's one of the pieces I don't think people understand. I know we've had employees that have come on not understanding on call and the pieces that you have to go into of the different work that has to be done after hours. When you start talking about cybersecurity incidents, you can be all hands on deck for a few weeks straight across. So you've got to be willing to sacrifice some free time and things like that. And you've got to have a hunger to learn. I think those are the big pieces. I mean, we had an incident a couple of years ago where we had one of our major clients that got hit. They had a South American company. Well, they have a South American branch, and they had a South American MSP working with them that didn't 2FA their global admin account into their 365. They got in, and they were able to push out ransomware to all the machines, and it was just a huge, huge mess. But it took us solidly for all hands on deck, including the majority of their IT department, 3 weeks. We were working weekends. We were working. I mean, I think my group was sleeping like 3 hour shifts where we were sleeping for 3 hours, then swap out and going through everything and getting to the point where meetings were just so messed up. I mean, they were using Intune to push out stuff all over the place. And so it was a massive, massive issue. And we were lucky that we were able to catch it when we did. And we had some things already put out there that stopped some of the ransomware from being pushed out and things like that. But it definitely was a huge issue. And I think one of the things you got to be willing to do is sacrifice some time. I mean, you can't just walk away from an issue like that and be like, well, I worked 8 hours, so I'm going home. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I feel like it's different. Time requirements are different depending on the domain in security, right? Like incident response, if you're on an incident response team and you're working for an incident response based company, I mean, you can just expect, you know, weekends are going to be destroyed, birthdays, holidays, things like that, right? But you're not going to cut your teeth in security at a better place.
Yeah.
So there's a trade-off, right? Like, you know, when you're younger, that's probably the best place that you can possibly be, because when you leave there, you're going to have so much experience. You'll be able to see so many different things, and you'll have touched so many different environments that, that experience will pay off. It'll be worth its weight in gold, I guess.
Yeah, 100% trial by fire. I think that goes for IT as a whole. I think that's one of the pieces you got to be willing to do is put yourself out in the unknown and go out and learn through experience versus, I mean, you can read every book there is out there, but until you actually put yourself in that situation and deal with different things, you're not going to learn it the same way. I mean, I cut my teeth 100% on massive server outages or cybersecurity attacks that, like, going into it, you're like, oh crap, I don't know enough to deal with this. And then by the end of it, you've learned quite a bit. So
Hmm. Do you have a process for, because it sounds like you're drinking from the fire hose quite a bit. Do you have a process, like an after action report, almost like something like the military
yeah,
does, right? After a mission, where you kind of sit down and digest what happened and everything like that?
we always do a post-mortem after everything we do. We do post-mortems after almost everything. We do it after onboardings, do it after incidents, we do it after any kind of major failure out there so that we can look at it and see what we could do better. We can change our documentation to adapt to maybe some of the places there were holes, those kind of things. So yeah, we always do a post-mortem on everything.
Hmm.
Go through it.
So I guess we're kind of dancing around it a bit, right? Why don't you tell us, what the company is, what you guys specialize in and everything like that, and then we'll go from there.
So we are a managed service provider. We do IT and base level cybersecurity for small to medium businesses. We actually work with a couple of primary MSSPs, which is just the security providers themselves. So we have some companies we work with on that do some of the larger stuff, but we can do the stuff they can do. We're just not specialized in it the way that they are. I mean, that's all they do. We do also just the normal IT stuff. We do consulting, business planning through technology, those kind of things. We do a lot of stuff with the construction industry right now. But one of the big pieces we are largely involved in is compliance, cybersecurity documentation, compliance documentation. We help a lot of companies get their SOC 2 and do their SOC 2 audits. We do a lot of audit situations. The big piece that we do work with a lot of people on what we do with our third party vendors is like PCI, things like that, things we're going to need a little bit bigger, little better tools and a little bit more education on the PCI compliance piece of it. It's a little bit more difficult. There's a lot of pieces to it, but we go and we do incident response for all of our clients. We've done some incident response outside of that. If we have to, we go outside and work with the third parties, but we don't always have to do that. A lot of times we're able to handle it ourselves.
Hmm. Yeah, from what you were saying previously, right, with that MSSP not enabling 2FA on the global admin, I mean, that's a pretty egregious security violation, right? How how do you keep the MSSPs in check if you're a customer, and then if you're a third party like yourself? Like, how do you handle that? Because there's a lot of companies out there, and I remember I was working for a financial institution, and they had an MSSP that, to be quite honest, I hated every experience I ever had with them. I did not want to get on the call with them ever. And God forbid I escalate something to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just a terrible experience overall, right? But my biggest issue was, how do we know that they're doing what they're claiming that they're doing, and that they're actually making our environment, more secure, that they're actually doing their job? We have no way of checking that. How do you keep them in check and ensure that they're not, creating more security holes or gaps in your environment?
We do audits, so we do quarterly audits on everything, and we have a pen testing tool that we use ourselves. That we go out, do a full audit. We do an audit of the 365. In fact, that global admin had been caught that week that it wasn't MFA, and we had brought it up in our security meeting, and that was one of the things that they were going to go back and make sure it was set. They'd already gotten in by that point. There wasn't a whole lot. I mean, when you look at it, I think one of the big issues, especially when we start talking about holes and security, is a good hacker is going to get into your environment and stay there for a long time before they really do anything that you're going to really do. I mean, detect directly. I mean, they're not going to kick off ransomware day one. Well, they might. A bad one will, but a good one's going to be out there for a while. So by the time we caught that hole, they'd been in for at least 2 weeks by that point. And then once they figured out that we knew they were there, that's when they started to kick everything off. So I think the auditing is the real good way that we do that. We try to do quarterly. Sometimes it depends on the client. If we have to, we'll do more. That client for a year, we did monthly auditing after the attack to make sure everything was set the way it was supposed to be. The good thing about using somebody else, like a third party, is you're not checking your own work. Somebody else is checking your work, and you're checking their work a lot of the times. So we're doing audits on our own also on the outside. We're making sure that everything fits within what our standards are. And so that helps a lot within that. But so far, we've had very few problems with any MSSP that we've ever worked with. This one was not within our control. It just happened to be that their South American group were using them.
Yeah, it's always interesting how global companies kind of dice up their IT departments and figure all that out. Like I feel like there's no right way to handle it necessarily, but all of the ways that I've seen are like they're fairly poor, right? Like you always try to go with like the lowest bidder because you'd have this insane, bill right at the end of every month if you don't go with the lowest bidder. But then when you go with the lowest bidder, you're going with a local company typically, and if it's a local company in a I guess a lower standard country, right? You're not getting the best talent. You're not getting the best security or the best resources and whatnot. And so it's a double-edged sword almost.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that mindset comes from a lot of these other countries. You pay a lot less for your licensing, you pay a lot less for everything. So then when you pay for your services, you pay a lot less too, and it just all correlates together. I think, yeah, that's one of the big mistakes they made. I mean, after that attack, that particular company was, when we first started with them, they were like, their network was a mess, everything was a mess. So we basically got them up to a really secure point, and we had gotten Intune rolled into them to be able to roll everything out and do all the pieces that needed to be done. The irony of that whole situation is they hadn't rolled out Intune to South America, so only their American sites got hit by the attack because that's the only ones that had Intune. But that's what the hackers used. And the other piece that comes along with once you're attacked is now they're always a target. They're constantly attacked all the time, so they have to be extra secure. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that's something that a lot of companies, misunderstand almost, right? Once you get hit once, that target is kind of increased on you because now they know, hey, we got them ransomware and we got this amount of money out of them before. I bet we could do it again,
Yep.
and they come back 6, 7, 8 months later and they're doing it again. So if you don't just patch the holes that they use to exploit to get in, you have to do a significant amount more on top
Yes.
of it, right? Because now you are the directed target.
Well, and then you add in the piece that they got. If they got in and were in for any period of time, they've gained intelligence. They know who is who. They know the email addresses. They can use much simpler attacks. They can do spear phishing really super easily because they're able to get in there. They can do brute force attacks on passwords. They can buy a password list and find that particular user is on another account, and then you figure out what their password is there. There's all sorts of these pieces that flow there that we deal with and have dealt with for the last 2 years. I mean, we're shutting down 365 accounts and PCs. We were for a while there pretty much every week. So,
Wow. What's the threat landscape look like for the cloud overall, right? Because it seems like more and more of IT is moving to the cloud, but that really it increases the threat landscape in a lot of different areas, right? We touched on one where an MSSP didn't configure the global admin account correctly. I mean, for a cloud security expert, like myself, right? That's the first thing I'm looking at when I go into any environment. That's literally the very first thing I'm looking at.
that's
But for them, they didn't they didn't know it, they didn't act on it, right?
Mhm.
Um, so what does that threat landscape look like now?
I think it's pretty high. I mean, it's a pretty nutty landscape, but I think there's a lot of good tools like a SASE environment, things that you can put over the top of your cloud environment that allow you a lot more security and allows you to do things like network zero trust and a lot of pieces where you're breaking things down that you're mitigating the access the user has, therefore mitigating the access that the attacker would have. Doing that through different types of technologies that you can put over the top of your cloud environments. And I think that's a big one that's helping out a ton. And I mean, the great thing about cloud is it allows you to work from anywhere. It allows people to do all sorts of things. Companies don't have to have people just from the same state. They can have them all over the world. You just have to have the things to protect it. And I think they're just easier to attack if you don't put in the right buffers on things. If you aren't putting in the right technologies and it's technologies, it's policies and processes, and education. Education is the biggest piece. If you're not educating your employees that what a phishing emails looks like, or not to put out a code, or not to do anything like that, then that's your first point of failure. That's the low hanging fruit. So you could have all the technology in the world, and somebody goes out there and puts out the wrong thing or allows somebody in. You got some problems. I mean, some of these things like SASE will prevent that, but there's pieces that you could definitely get in. That's why on one side you mitigate their access to just the things they need. They need access to these folders, this printer, this, so that you can't get that lateral spread going across your network and your cloud environments. But we just had a client, and it wasn't a direct cyber attack, but they had a vendor that was attacked. They got banking information for them, called their financial manager, and he gave away their passcode into their bank, and they drained their bank accounts. And that was just a couple weeks ago. So it wasn't like the most technical attack in the world, but yep, did that. So, I mean,
Wow.
yeah. And I think,
Yeah, I've seen it where, you know, the attackers will target like the executive's assistant or something like that and really do a good job of impersonating the executive and have them, transfer a certain amount of money. It's frustrating, right? And with that, like you said, the training becomes critical. The training becomes, really the backbone of everything that you're doing. Have you found a good training platform or a good um, a good certification path to go down that provides the right amount of training, the right amount of background that these people in these roles need?
there's a couple of different ones. I mean, there's the ones that we use just for employees as a whole that go across the board, which I think are the more likely ones to have a problem, like Breach Secure Now, and then I can't remember what the other one was that we use off the top of my head. And I think there's some decent stuff you can go out there to train some of the higher ups. I think the higher ups tend to be the more, it's either the really low level people or the really high up people that tend to be the ones that make the biggest mistakes and tend to be the ones that let out the most information. I think what we basically do is we do some training ourselves. We use some of the tools that are out there like Breach Secure Now and things like that go out and actually send out training videos, send out fake phishing emails, and we can tell who we need to train to and things like that. The big piece of it is it's just got to be top of mind awareness. It can't be something you just train once and go away with. You've got to just constantly be pushing this into people's heads. I mean, I think I just got a phishing email while we were on this that popped up that was some sort of here's a here's a payment via ACH, and I don't know who the company is, so I'm not clicking anything. So those things pop up all the time, and you just got to teach people to stay away from them and understand what they are and the type of problems they can cause.
Hmm. Yeah, I always have issues, trying to find the right solution, right? That trains people up in that. Have you found a good solution to do that?
I think just good is relative. We found ones that definitely help. Like I said, like I mentioned, Breach Secure Now earlier. It's good. It's simple. I think the biggest problem you have training people is they can't be long-winded training sessions. It's going to be something short that they understand. Doesn't affect their productivity because people aren't going to do them if they're long and take forever. And so they're kind of worthless on that point. I think you just have to understand the human mind and how it works, and the attention spans are short. So I always look for things that are short and to the point and can get things done. And a lot of them are kind of like cartoony videos that are 3-4 minutes long, and get people through that. And then they go through their little testing piece, and then we send out the phishing tests and see who really listened to it and who didn't.
Hmm. Yeah, I know when I used to run the phishing tests for a company, I would I would probably be a little bit unfair, but it's not like the attackers are going to be, fair with it, trying to say like, oh, we can't send an email about their 401k. It's not going to be, that's not fair, to mess with someone's retirement or anything like
Yeah.
that. They're not going to do that. And my boss would get so many complaints about, my phishing test, saying like, oh, that was unfair. That wasn't right for him to, create this phishing test that used my 401k and everything else like that, or talked about my bonus during bonus time. My response was, okay, well, are the hackers going to count that out, right? Because if they're
Yeah.
looking at us, they know when the bonus is hit. They know when bonus time comes around. I mean, you could take a wild guess and say it's the end of the year, and you're probably right. Are they going to, say that that's unfair? They don't want that money. They don't want that, that 20 grand bonus, that 50 grand bonus, right? Um, it's a double-edged sword, right? And my boss would constantly have to, kind of weigh the battle on either side, right? Kind of go back and forth on it, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, I guess I didn't last too long with testing, with doing the phishing test, but I felt I did a great job.
Well, I think cybersecurity generally gets a lot of pushback. I mean, we always walk the line of productivity versus security. I mean, you got to be able to work and be able to, but it's the same idea. Like, you've still got to push the envelope a little bit and make sure people understand how much these things can be attacked. Because you can have, I mean, we've had clients where the employee was attacked because they couldn't get all the issue for the company, but they were able to get in and get banking information on the employer. And they've been attacked and had to do a bunch of things. So it's in their best interest not to. And especially if you start talking about people that are working with like HIPAA environments and things like that, they could be held for the things that go down. And they don't really, I mean, people don't understand all those pieces that go into it. So yeah, I think the more brutal you are with your testing, the better it's going to be in the long run for the users.
Yeah, it gets them used to seeing, questionable things that are asking for a little bit too much, or asking for weird things that they shouldn't be. Uh, what what's a good path to get into incident response? I know we kind of talked about, um, the experience side of it, where you go into it fairly early on in your career or whatnot, but is there different certifications or different training that you're looking for to bring someone in?
CISP, like, there's a couple of, but there's no real good way to get a full-fledged cybersecurity certification like that. I mean, you can do like Net Plus, and those are good places to start to be on a low-level piece of it. But to get into the major parts, you're going to have experience. Like, I think about the CISP is like 5 years, I think. I don't know. It's hard to get into the major incident response pieces of it, but you start with your Net Plus, you get in with a company that's willing to put you on maybe an incident response team, moving up from help desk to something where you're a helper within that level. You're going through and you're involved in their tabletops. We do a lot of tabletop exercises with our clients, which is really helpful. And it's good to get some of the lower level people involved with those, so they kind of understand your documentation and things like that. But it's really just getting into an IT department and letting your manager know that you're interested in cybersecurity, get that Net Plus, Security Plus done out of the way, and then start working your way through and get the experience, because the experience is going to be what's key to getting into some of the major pieces. And then becoming a security officer for a company, that's a pretty good job. It's a little stressful, but if you can manage an incident response team, it's a pretty good situation. You're in there making the decisions on how things work. They're a little bit of a pain in the butt for the IT people sometimes, but yeah, I mean, you just got to work your way up there. I think experience does better than any kind of certification. If you have a job that allows you to get some experience, that's the key way to go.
Hmm. Yeah, I always approach it from like a multi-prong approach, right? Like getting that experience, getting the certifications, getting the right education, right? I want to eliminate as many questions in that hiring manager's mind as possible. With doing everything that I possibly can to get the right skill set, to get the right knowledge and whatnot to move up, right? Uh, it's just it's an interesting market right now, right? Where
Yeah.
I'm hearing from a lot of people that, it seems like a lot of companies are posting open roles, but no one is really hiring for them. And so trying to find ways to break down, those unseen or unspoken barriers, I think is always helpful.
I think on the other side is the hiring companies. It's hard to hire somebody security. I mean, we hired last fall. We hired a security person, brought them in, and they were terrible. I mean, they had all the certifications, everything, but they just they like weren't real world experienced enough to really to do the things we needed to do. I mean, we had a phishing attack on the executive team for one of our larger clients, and they were my help desk guys were 10 times more helpful and 10 times better than he was. In fact, we got a complaint from the CEO on that guy just because he didn't know how to handle things, and he wouldn't do the things we needed to do. Like he just wouldn't he wasn't wouldn't do like shutting off accounts right when they needed to be, and he wasn't super. His customer services skills were really terrible, and he didn't know how to communicate these pieces. And you're just like, holy crap! So we had to get rid of him. I mean, finding somebody that can do the job and knows how to talk to people, and I mean, you can't be a developer and be a security engineer. I mean, you're going to have to talk to people. You're going to be dealing with people in their high stress situations, those kind of things. So I think they're hard. It's hard to hire to that position too. It's not like a job where you don't talk to people. That's for sure.
Yeah. That I feel like that's a part of the job that a lot of people don't realize is a part of it, right? When they're trying to get into it. I remember when I was in help desk and being in that stressful situation where, the application that you're providing help desk for is a critical application, right? It's a 911 software that overlays your PBX and gives you enhanced information and whatnot. And so usually when people are calling you, it's a system down, system degrading situation. It's already high stress. Maybe it's the very first call in the morning, and maybe it's, your only call of the day that it just goes all day long.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they're not they're not happy most of the time. They're not very kind most of the
Yeah.
time. They're usually yelling at you, inducing that stress right off the bat. You
Yeah.
know, in a situation where you need to be on top of your game and you just started your day, right? It's Monday morning,
Oh,
and
oh, it's either Monday morning or Friday afternoon was my
oh,
memory.
what was it? CrowdStrike pushed that update at like 4 p.m. on Thursday or something.
Yep.
It's like, guys, what are you doing?
We were lucky. Only one of our clients, we had just put CrowdStrike on them, and it was only something like 30 machines. We were lucky. I remember my operations manager, his comment was, imagine being in charge of like 1,000 machines that this went down with, because you got to touch every one of them.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's airlines out there that are still recovering from it,
yeah,
and the only reason Southwest was unscathed is because they're still on Windows 3.1 or something like that.
really too cheap to buy CrowdStrike. I mean, it's not the cheapest piece of software.
Yeah, I'm sure that it made a lot of people question if they're going to have auto updates on going forward,
Yeah,
right? Because like for a security person to say, yeah, let's have auto updates on all the time for an EDR software, that's a big thing. And so you really go through and you put that solution through its paces, trying to build that confidence, right off the bat. So you can have it on auto update as quickly as possible. With other solutions, you do other things, right? Where you kind of have, test groups of systems where the auto update is turned on and everything else is not.
yep.
Well, now, I was even just thinking about this earlier today for my day job, where it's like, man, should we really even have that thing on? Because we have like 600,000 machines
Oh
in
wow.
our environment. What if someone, you know, has that enabled and the group is larger than like 2,000 machines? What are we what are we going to do, right?
Yeah,
We're probably calling an incident response company at that point.
you are with like 600,000 machines with that CrowdStrike, because you had to go in and put the machines into safe mode to get that resituated.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it took my guys on 30 machines. It took them all day on Friday to get that fixed, and that's just, I mean, it's why I'm touching every one of them. And sometimes, like, a lot of these people are remote, so you had to go call them and walk them through how to do it.
Oh man, that's
Yeah.
brutal.
Yeah,
Because you're not always getting the most technical person.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Man, what do you think? Well, what do you think is gonna come of this? Because Delta already, said that they're probably gonna seek, charges, or not charges, but payment for the hours spent and whatnot, right? What do you think is gonna happen with this?
I don't know. I think it's a weird situation. Got to figure out, like, what was their due diligence on, like, how well did they test this update? Like, are they just pushing out things they shouldn't be pushing out? I think it's going to come down, because it's not like this hasn't happened with Windows before. Like Microsoft, this used to be a problem with Microsoft all the time. You push out a critical update, next thing you know, all servers are blue screening all over the place. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out in court, and see who's at fault. And I mean, they're suing both Microsoft and CrowdStrike, is what I read.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's it's a weird situation because CrowdStrike is the number one by far EDR on the market, right? So it's like, okay, who else am I going to go with? Am I going to go with Sentinel-1? Like, am I going to go with, I mean, at that point, I don't even know who else to, like, bring into the picture, right? Because Carbon Black used to be a big player, and ever since they got bought out 3-4 times, they haven't really been a player in the space at all. I mean, you try and Google them and it goes to another website, right?
Yep.
Like, there used to be, Cyber Reason in the mix, but that kind of died out fairly quickly. And so you have all these companies going with a top tier product, right? Like, I can tell you for sure, we sold it internally as it being the premier EDR solution. 70% of the companies in the world, like, are using this thing, right? 100% of the companies of our size are using it. So, like, where do you go? You take this outage, and then wherever you go from here, it's a downgrade. And so now you're dealing with an inferior product. So it's just like, it's a headache.
It is. I mean, but something like this, I don't know if you remember the Kaseya breach that wiped out all the MSPs, that they got breached because they were throwing out updates to the people that were running non-cloud instances. They didn't put the right update out. But Kaseya survived that, and I thought they were done for when that went down, because they got something like, I don't know, thousands of companies ransomware through that whole thing. So
wow,
I don't know. Yeah, you can definitely have a mistake made and still survive, and it's going to take a little bit of time to repair. But CrowdStrike's phenomenal. They're expensive, and that's one of the key parts of why it was big companies getting hit with it, not smaller ones. And I think one of the big issues that comes down to that, though, is people create their entire security stack through CrowdStrike. So their SOC is CrowdStrike, and everything's CrowdStrike. And then when something like that happens, then they're completely screwed. And if they want to go out and find somebody else, they've got to replace all those pieces with multiple different vendors. So I don't know. We tend to diversify our stack a little bit just for those reasons alone. But yeah, I think CrowdStrike will come out being okay, but it's going to take a little while of repairing. We'll see how the court cases get ugly. That might be what hurts them, because that's going to change the public perception on things.
Yeah. Delta's, I think it was their CEO was saying, you never hear of Apple having an outage like this or anything like that. But at the same time, Apple isn't providing the same product.
No.
They're providing, end user, customer centric, products that anyone and everyone can buy, right? And they're not creating server OSs anymore.
No.
They're not creating servers. They used to, but that was like 15 years ago.
Yep.
And so it's a totally different ball game. Like, I'm an Apple fanboy, I'll admit it, right? Like I have an Apple phone, laptop. The only thing that isn't Apple in my house is my desktop because I game on it. And
Yeah.
when I told Apple that when I interviewed for them probably a decade ago, they were like, "Oh, well, why don't you game on a Mac?" And I'm sitting here like, guys, are you that out of touch
Yeah.
that you literally don't realize that your platform is not for gaming?
Well, I mean, Apple has had its problems. OS X has had tons of problems where they release a new version and all of a sudden 3/4 of your apps don't work.
Yeah.
And so we run into that. I mean, anytime we're dealing with any kind of updates on their operating systems, we're always tell our clients like, hey, wait 3 to 6 months because you go on there and all of a sudden your QuickBooks isn't working. It's a primary thing that you're using. That's not going to work out well for you. So Apple does have those issues. It's just not as big of an issue. I mean, you can always go back to your previous version and things like that. But everything has its issues. But I think, yeah, it was just such a huge hit with CrowdStrike. I mean, it stranded people, banks were down. I mean, it was pretty nuts. So I think that's where the big piece comes there. I mean, you start talking about like, I've never seen this Apple. Well, Apple has its problems. I mean, iOS, there's a reason why you back up your phone before you go to the next level. And I mean, there's all these little things that pop up. I mean, and so they happen. It just, I think what hurts CrowdStrike is they forced the update out. So
Yeah, that's a huge thing as well. You know, like even on my phone, it hasn't happened in a while, but you know, I think it was related directly to like the Pegasus
Yep.
exploit or the Pegasus malware.
Yep.
Right, where Apple was like, you're updating your phone right now,
Yep.
and there's no option to disable it or anything like that. It makes me nervous then because it's like, all right, well, how much testing did you put into this? You know, if you're forcing it on us, it kind of sounds like you wrote it, 3 hours ago, and you're like, works good on my phone. Like, let's just push it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what happens a lot of times too. And so you never know what other little things it's going to break. I mean, I'm doing the beta with iOS 18 right now, and it was like, might not, well, I'll do it and checking it out. I always want to see the newest, the latest, and the greatest and play around with it. So right now at work, I run purely on PCs, but for the longest time, I was running a Mac with a parallel, running a VM of when applications wouldn't work within the Mac environment. So I'm a Mac fan. I use a lot of Apples. My wife works for Apple, so.
Do you think companies will rethink their tech stack after an outage like that? Like, will they start, maybe looking at Linux a little bit more seriously or other, architectures like Oracle potentially?
I mean, even Macs. I mean, none of the Macs got hit by the CrowdStrike issue.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we had that same company I was talking about. They run about a third Mac and 2/3 PCs because their developers use Macs. So none of the Macs got hit. So that was, I mean, you can see Apple could definitely take advantage of that and move it forward. CrowdStrike runs great on Macs. So one of the big pluses of CrowdStrike is how well it does on across platforms.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, I think, where the court case goes and how effective that is against CrowdStrike, right? And it'll be interesting to see the changes that take place in the industry even from the outcome of that court case, because I feel like a lot of other, security vendors that are critical pieces of software in anyone's security stack, I think it's easy for us to forget where these applications or where these agents sit on our systems, right?
Yep.
Like they're like the most critical part of the system. If this thing has issues, your entire system has issues. And I feel like people are kind of just now reawakening to that logic.
Well, I think that comes back to like productivity versus security type situation. I mean, you can't overdo it on the security side and have issues, and that security has issues, and next thing you know, you have no productivity. So that's been a big piece. We run an application. It's a zero trust application that just doesn't. I mean, basically only allows applications that are whitelisted to run on the machine. And with developers, we have a ton of problems because there's all sorts of things that can cause it to flag things and not allow it to run. And so we fight that productivity battle all the time. There can be a switch in that like there could be just a switch within some line of code that will cause it to freak out and block it. So Yeah.
Yeah, what were you gonna say?
I would just say it's that security versus productivity piece, and that's I think what we saw with CrowdStrike is how deeply it affected productivity. I mean, it stopped half the world in one big shot.
Yeah, yeah, it stopped like half the world, excluding China and Russia,
Yeah,
where it's banned probably, right?
exactly.
Um, well, Chris, this has been a great conversation. Before I let you go, though, how about you tell my audience where they can find you if they wanted to reach out and connect, and where they can find your company?
You can come to our website's technologyresponse.com. Um, our phone number is 720-420-1589. Or you can reach out to me either at info@technologyresponse.com, or you can email me directly, chris@technologyresponse.com.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Well,
Thank you
thanks,
so much.
Chris, for coming on.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode.